Okay, welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for joining us for our Modern Minds six-part series. This is the third part of a six-part series. There's a wonderful crowd here in the room, so I feel tremendous energy, so it's really great to be here. I want to once again express my appreciation on behalf of all of us to Albert and Heidi Proa, and also Anna and Bill Tenenblatt for having the generosity and vision to sponsor this six-part series. Thank you. Please remember that next week we have the privilege of hearing from Hillel Neuer, the Executive Director of UN Watch. It's going to be an incredible, engaging, and important evening. I know next week is Erev Yontif, so some people might be out of town, you might be away, but hopefully it works for your schedules. Please be here next week, Wednesday night at 8 o'clock to hear Hillel Neuer. Okay, it's a great privilege for us tonight to have Michael Medved. You all know that Michael Medved is a nationally syndicated radio talk show host. He's a best-selling author. He's a veteran film critic, and he's someone who is one of the most important and influential political and cultural commentators that we have in America today. His daily 3-hour broadcast reaches more than 3.5 million listeners on nearly 200 stations across the country. He's brilliant, he's engaging, he has a deep sense of values. Many of us in the community know him well from the West Coast and from this area, and we've had the opportunity to have Michael as a scholar in residence in our community before. It's great to bring him back. He's an expert about the American landscape and also the Jewish community, which makes him an amazing speaker for the topic of the American Jewish future, doom or destiny. I think that's something that we're all interested in knowing the answer to that question. Privileged to call upon Michael Medved.
Thank you. How wonderful to be here. How wonderful to see so many old and new friends, and my brother, Harry Medved, who was kind enough to get me here. He lives in Oak Park, California. He's the only one of the 4 of us, there are 4 brothers, who still lives in Southern California. And I flew in this morning from our home in Seattle. We've lived in Seattle for 18 years. And left home before Omed HaShachar to make the early plane. Did my show today from KRLA, AM 870, which, more on that later, where of course people can hear our show right after Ben Shapiro and Dennis Prager at noon to 3. And then we did noon to 3. Then my brother got me into a screening this afternoon, which I can't believe. And we were able to come over here. All of that is much more optimistic than the events of yesterday. And let me begin by talking about that very briefly, because that will help to focus, I think, what we need to talk about. Isn't it unbelievable that it really is yesterday, Tuesday, that we had the events in Yerushalayim that shocked the whole world. And not just the brutality and the butchery and the callousness, but the celebration of it and the moral obtuseness of it in the world at large. And one of the things that happened yesterday on the air is we had a caller named Ted who was calling from the Seattle area. And Ted called up, and I spoke first hour yesterday on the radio show to my brother Jonathan, who's lived in Yerushalayim for 26 years. And then the last hour of the show, I was speaking to Professor Alan Dershowitz. And I disagree with Alan about a lot of things. He was wrong about O.J. Simpson. But But on issues about Israel and making the arguments for Israel, Professor Dershowitz is superb. And I appreciate him very much. So he's on the line with me. And this guy, Ted, calls in. And he says, here you are. There are 4 Jews who have died. That's right, 4 Jews and 1 heroic Druze policeman. His family should be comforted. Did people cover here that Druze policeman who gave his life trying to rescue people at the shul has a 4-month-old baby at home who will never know his father because of the unspeakable barbarity of one of his fellow Arabs, a Muslim Arab. In any event, so Ted calls and he says, you are making such a big deal, it's such a horror, you're devoting so much time, there are 4 Jews who died. Why don't you ever say anything about the thousands of Palestinians who are killed every day? And so he was very upset about this, and Professor Dershowitz actually answered him fairly aggressively, as Alan does, and said, well, listen, one thing about Palestinians who died, particularly the Palestinians who died in Gaza, try to ask yourself, who killed them? It has now become clear that, and in fact the UN itself, the United Nothing, has even spoken on this, that it was Hamas that actually exposed people to death, and that Israelis wanted passionately to, of course, spare the lives of Jews and to spare the lives of Palestinians. Hamas wanted to kill the maximum number of Jews and to kill the maximum number of Palestinians. They were the ones who held people as human shields. They were the ones who deliberately prevented people from running from buildings. They were the ones who killed people. I might have added, which we didn't have time, one of the frustrating things occasionally about talk radio is commercials intervene. And God bless our commercials, they make a lot of good things possible. But I would have added, look, how many Palestinians in Gaza do you think would have died if there had been no rocket attacks? And the answer, of course, is 0. This was not a war of revenge. This was not a war of ideology. This was a war of self-defense. It was a response to rocket attacks. And this is a formulation that Professor Dershowitz has used many times, and it was a very good formulation. Everyone knows that if the Palestinians put down their guns, if the Gazans had stopped the rocket attacks, there would be peace tomorrow, as there was. The war in Gaza, Operation Pillars of Defense, that war ended each time they agreed to stop the rocket attacks. No more war. No more killing of Palestinians. All that would happen if Palestinians put down their guns is there would be peace tomorrow, but if the Israelis put down their guns, there would be genocide tomorrow. And the world saw that illustrated yesterday. So I was asked by a friend. I have a friend, he is a veteran of the State Department and various American intelligence agencies that he's not allowed to write about. And he's retired, and he's an older guy, and he's a curmudgeon. And like a lot of people who work for those intelligence agencies, he's not very friendly to Israel. He's friendly to Jewish people here. Doesn't like Israel. Doesn't like the idea that there should be a national state of the Jewish people. Doesn't like the whole thing. We corresponded yesterday after the show. And he said, you know, I felt for you. I felt for you not only because of the terrible, terrible loss for the Jewish people. Not only because I think of you in your synagogue and how you must feel putting on the filling. To think of the butchery that occurred yesterday. He said, I feel for you because of what the President said. The President of the United States, who, okay, maybe it's unreasonable to expect a president who's elected in a very compromised political process to be a moral leader for a country. But he shouldn't be last in terms of moral insight. When John F. Kerry makes a better statement than the president, it's terrible. What the president said, and what offended me so much, he said, too many Israelis have died, too many Palestinians have died. Both sides need to work together to bring calm, and both sides need to reject violence. Mr. President, when have the Israelis ever failed to reject violence? There's been no rejection, there's been no failure to reject violence, there's been no embrace of violence by our side. Our side only uses violence in self-defense. There is a huge moral chasm between those who use violence for the sake of protecting life and those who use violence for the sake of taking life. And then celebrate the butchery. So my friend, the veteran of a major intelligence agency, his name is Tom. Tom said, how do your people go on knowing that the whole world thinks you're wrong? And that's the question I want to address. Because it's a question not only for Israelis, they're used to it, but for American Jews, for young people at college campuses. And by the way, I have to say something here. This is a little bit of novice. A yeshiva classmate of my son's at Northwest Yeshiva High School on Mercer Island, Washington, which is where we live, just became student body president of UCLA. Right? Yeah! And this is a huge responsibility, because being student body president of UCLA with all the crazies and the radicals, and this is a kid named Avi Noam Barel. And a great kid, and someone who was part of the wedding that my son and daughter-in-law just experienced August 31st. Anyway. Okay, college campuses, and UCLA included. You have support for the BDS movement. You have negativity. How do you respond? How can we be so sure that we are right when the whole world believes that we're wrong? And that's part of the question I want to answer tonight. Now, the title for this speech is The American Jewish Community, Doom or Destiny. Let's cover doom first. What I want to do is I want to talk about doom, I want to talk about destiny, I want to talk about some bad bets, I want to talk about the worst bet of all, and then I want to talk about some better strategies, and then we'll have time for your questions, because it won't be too long. In any event, you talk about doom. Everyone here, I am sure, has heard something about this very, very major study. Many people believe it is the most thorough, the most responsible, the most complete study of the American Jewish community ever, that was released in October of 2013. It was from Pew Center for the Study of Religion. They study Jews in every state, all states of the Union. And yes, there are Jews in all states of the Union. In Alaska, you know, they're known as the frozen chosen. And that's frozen chosen, not frozen Hosen. But in any event, here is the conclusion they came to. And this actually backs up what is in polls all over the place. The Jewish community, as in terms of a percentage of the American polity, reached its peak in 1957. In 1957, when they asked people, what is your preferred religion, 3.8% said Jewish. Anyone know what the number is now? It's 1.8%. So you are talking about a community that has declined by half. As a percentage of the American population. Some other details from the Pew Research study. This is an unbelievable number. But again, it's backed up. American Jewish Committee, other people who look at Jews say this is an actual number. This is the harbinger of doom, right? Of all adult Jews who have gotten married since the year 2000, what percentage have married someone who is not Jewish? And someone who is not Jewish, that excludes people who have any kind of conversion. Even the most liberal, easygoing conversion, sprinkle a few drops of mikvah water on someone's head and say a few brachas, boom, you're Jewish. All kinds of conversions, that's excluded. We're talking about what percentage of Jews who got married since 2000 married someone who wasn't Jewish. Anyone want to give a guess? 50%? 80%? No, thank God. You're awfully close. Someone said 58%, 62%. Which is unbelievable. And it's worse than it sounds, because the way they phrase the question, if two Jewish people marry each other, they count twice. Right? This is because those are people who have married another Jewish person. This is a way below replacement level in terms of population. There's more. And some of this stuff is unbelievable. The largest segment of American Jews are Jews who say they are unaffiliated, they have no denominational preference. The second largest segment is people who say they're Reformed. 35% of American Jews say they are Reformed. And of those Reformed Jews, what percentage say religion is important to me? 18%. So in other words, what does it mean? By the way, for Orthodox Jews who say religion is important to them, it's 97%. And you think, if you're going to bother to call yourself Orthodox, obviously religion is something important to you. But this is an amazing thing. They asked a question, what is an essential part of being Jewish? Okay? The highest number, the highest response, where 73% said this is an essential part of being Jewish, what do you think it was? No, food is on the bottom, thank God.
It's sweet.
You know, some of us don't even particularly like what passes for Jewish food. No offense to Pico Kosher Deli, but or to all those other places to eat. But no, the number one aspect that's essential to being Jewish, remembering the Holocaust. 73%. Then leading an ethical, moral life, 69%. Working for justice and equality, 58%. Having a good sense of humor, 42%. Having a good sense of humor is tied with caring about Israel. All right? This is unbelievable. Then being part of the Jewish community, that's 28%. Then we're getting to the bottom. The very bottom is eating traditional Jewish foods, that's 14%. Observing Jewish law, 18% think that's an essential part of being Jewish. Okay, there's a lot more like this. It's pretty alarming. And it's worth paying attention to. Here's one other tidbit. What is compatible with being Jewish? Can a person be Jewish if he, she works on the Sabbath? 94% of American Jews say, no problem. If is strongly critical of Israel, 89%, no problem. Does not believe in God, 68%, no problem. What's the only problem people find? Believes Jesus was Messiah. 60% say, no way. If you believe that, you can't be Jewish. 34% say, okay, fine. No problem. Okay, not to continue with this, but I find this fascinating. It's sort of like watching a car wreck a little bit. You can't turn away. But they asked people about observance. And this is an amazing thing. And they threw in, as part of observance, like Shabbos candles, keep a kosher home, fast on Yom Kippur, and have a Christmas tree. Okay, that's one of the 3 times the number of Reform Jews have Christmas trees as light candles occasionally on the Sabbath, or keep kosher at home. 3 times! So 30% of Reform Jews have a Christmas tree every year. And by the way, it's higher than that among people who are not, say they're not Reformed, they're secular, they're nothing. This is an alarming pattern. And the question I would have for you, this is the doom aspect of things. If you look at these numbers, it's unsustainable. The American Jewish community is likely to go the way of the British Jewish community, which has some wonderful leadership. I love Lord Sachs, but he's living in the United States right now, teaching at YU. And the British Jewish community has declined in numbers by about half. And not about half as a percentage of British population, but about half in terms of actual numbers. By the way, anybody know what the fastest growing Jewish community outside of Israel is? Israel by far is the most rapidly growing Jewish community. Germany is also rapidly growing. The fastest growing, it is now the 4th largest Jewish community in the world, about to become the 3rd largest. Canada. God bless Stephen Harper, and he should limp off in the front of it. But, okay. So, this is the question that I have for you. You hear these statistics, and then I'm back at Beth Jacob. And when I say back at Beth Jacob, I've mentioned when I've been at this congregation before. Beth Jacob was the first place I ever attended Orthodox services. And I came here when Rabbi Lamb was the rabbi, back in the early 1970s, and experienced Yom Narayim here. And it was wonderful for me. And it was an eye-opener. Because there were these normal people. People who spoke English. And people who were extremely well educated. And again, it was transformational, and it was Beverly Hills. Not traditionally known to be a great center of Torah life and learning. It's like that Medved, or it's Beverly Hills. But here's the point. I come back here today, and you look at the difference in this neighborhood, or in Jewish resources in the Los Angeles area, between, say, 1974 and 2014. Unbelievable. Does it look like Jewish life is decaying? Punkt verkehrt. It's exactly the opposite. Jewish life has exploded in Southern California. And by the way, it's not just in Los Angeles area. It's not just in the hood here. And it's not just in La Brea. It's not just in Hancock Park, La Brea. It's not just in Pico Robertson. It's the Valley. My friend and colleague Ben Shapiro lives out in the Valley. And the stories that you hear about, I mean, and my brother Harry lives in Oak Park, California, where they have kosher schools, a beautiful mikvah. They have kosher food, very important. Pretty good pizza shop. I mean, it's Oak Park. If you look at the quality of Jewish life, the number of people who are engaged, the number of people are not having a tough time hearing me? Okay. If you look at the number of people who are engaged in serious Jewish learning, the explosion of kollels. We have a kollel in Seattle area, which is terrific. They do a great job. And they engage in learning some 200-300 people every week in different classes. My wife hosts a class for women from the kollel, a Seattle kollel. Their kollels, big kollels, and Phoenix has a very big, successful kollel. San Diego has exploded in Jewish resources. And then again, to talk about the food, I really do remember a time. We grew up in San Diego. My brother Harry was born in San Diego. He was very little when we moved from there, but I grew up there mostly. And when my Bubby would visit from Philadelphia to our home in San Diego, my father would make a pilgrimage from San Diego to LA to go to a kosher restaurant. Anyone remember Hartman's? Okay. Which used to be, that was it for kosher food, right? Hartman's on Fairfax. Plenty of kosher style. But if you want real, I bet today, do you look up, we ate tonight at a vegan Thai kosher place. So they're fantastic. So wait a minute. You have here on the one side all the figures from Pew. You have here these announcements about the decline of the Jewish community and it's unsustainable and we are not having enough kids and things are going to heck in a handbasket and things are not. But the realities of Jewish life are so dramatically different and better. I'll give you one other indication. And it's the kind of thing literally that was unimaginable. Unimaginable 20 years ago. Okay, I'm on a radio station, right? And it's a radio station that is run by wonderful Christian supporters of Israel. That's people who own KRLA and own Salem Communications. And they have chosen to put on their air, from 6 to 9, they have Ben Shapiro, who is a yarmulke-wearing, very serious, a very committed Orthodox Jew. He was here last week? Yeah, wonderful, good. Well, Ben is on the same station I'm on in Seattle also. He does a local show for Seattle and for Los Angeles. And then at 9 o'clock they have Dennis Prager, who will never ever call himself Orthodox, but that's the way he grew up, and he's a graduate of Yeshiva Flatbush. He says very proudly he graduated in the top 90% of his class. You've heard the stories at Yeshiva Flatbush. And then I'm on from noon to 3. So they're in very, very big trouble on Yom Tovim. We do tape. Dennis and Ben do guest hosts. You wouldn't know because you're not listening on Yom Tovim. That's the only time I want to ask you not to listen. But the point is, this is unimaginable. Really, it is. And you think about it. And he's become a dear friend. We just had the opportunity of spending Shabbos with Joe and Hadassah Lieberman. And Joe Lieberman, we have disagreements, political disagreements, but think of what it meant in one of the closest elections in American history. Joe Lieberman took Yom Tov Sheni. On Shemini Atzeret Simchat Torah. On Sukkot, would not campaign. It drove Al Gore crazy. Actually, he was probably crazy before, but no, he honored. Can you imagine that? And this was a team. Joe Lieberman came, well, you know how close to being vice president of the United States, and somebody who was honoring Yom Tov. So it's an unbelievable situation that we have. And one last thing here. With all of the decline in American Jewish numbers, in 2012 they did another major study, and this was a study that specifically was supposed to be the biggest study ever done of the tri-state Jewish area, the New York Jewish area, which is 1.8 million Jews. More than a third of all Jews who live in the United States of America live in the New York City area, in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut. 1.8 million people. And for the first time in 2012, since 1950, the Jewish community in New York is growing. Can you imagine? And part of it is Persians and Russians and Israelis and South Africans and people who come here from elsewhere. But part of it is a higher birth rate. And that is reflected, and MS, you can look it up, you won't believe me, you'll think it's bizarre, but it's true. This study was done by the New York Federation of Jewish Charities of New York, Greater New York, right? What percentage of all Jews in the tri-state area below the age of 18 identify as Orthodox. Are you ready? 74%. We are having kids. Okay? This is, by the way, same kind of thing is happening in Israel. It's happening across the country. They talk about Baltimore. We have dear friends who just moved to Baltimore to be close to now 14 grandchildren, right? But Baltimore could become the first city in American history where a majority of the Jews are Orthodox. So you have doom, you have destiny. You have two things happening at the same time. How do you explain it? Because there is destiny for the people who are embracing Jewish authenticity and religious faith, and doom for the other forms of Jewish identity. And let me speak about that now. I mentioned I was going to talk to you about some bad bets that people made. One of the things that I was very conscious of, because my brother and I grew up with my father's older brother, who was 21 years older than my father. My father had the great good fortune of being born here in the United States a little bit more than a year after his parents were reunited. My dad was born in 1926. My grandmother came over here in 1925 and to reunite with her husband. But my father had an older brother, 21 years old, my Uncle Moish, who in many ways was a mentor to all of us. But he was many, many things in his life. He was never Orthodox, but he was religious. And he was a great believer in Jewish identity, and one of his interests in Jewish identity was Yiddishism. How many people here knew at some point or another a Yiddishist, someone who believed that the Yiddish language would provide the survival raft for the Jewish people? That once faith went away, and people were no longer observant, and people were no longer... And the Yiddish neshama, because of Mamaloshin, because of Yiddish. People know people like that. They're the workman's circle, the Arbeiter ring, that's exactly right. And you know the real irony today? Who are the only people in the world who speak Yiddish today? Yeah, they're in Monsey, or they're in Skver, or they're in Mea Shearim. They tend to be Haredim, right? Anybody know a lot of secular Yiddish speakers? Answer, no. And maybe it's a shame. It is a shame. But it's one of those things, it was a bad bet. There were people who believed in what's called cultural Judaism. Remember this? That cultural Judaism would somehow bring us together. There was such a thing as Jewish culture. And I remember the 5 books. You didn't have 5 books of Moses in cultural Judaism. You had 5 books, one by Saul Bellow, one by Philip Roth, one by Bernard Malamud, one by Bruce J. Friedman. Just Jewish novelists, the great American Jewish novelists. These people would teach us what it meant to be Jewish. Really? It didn't work out so well. And you know what the answer to that is? Saul Bellow is a great novelist, but so is John Updike. And who is not Jewish, who's Christian, right? And the idea that somehow a novel that tells the story of Jewish suffering or Jewish misbehavior or even scenes from Jewish history, that this is somehow going to keep Jewish identity alive doesn't work. And then there are people in cultural Judaism who talked about Jewish filmmakers, which means filmmakers. I mean, basically, we have been very prominent in the motion picture industry. But really, I know that Robert Averick is here, and he's been responsible for one of the most substantive and affirmative of all Jewish films that was directed by the late Sidney Lumet, the film Stranger Among Us. And I think even Robert would grant that as a survival strategy, the idea of Jewish film keeping Jewish identity alive. Really, Woody Allen is going to be our Rebbe, right? It doesn't work. And here's a very sad thing. Do you know even small communities have Jewish film festivals? There's a San Diego Jewish Film Festival. We have a Seattle Jewish Film Festival. I get invited to these things from time to time. And it's so depressing because they always play the same films. Except now they add these new films about the Jewish gay experience. And then there's a film, oh, I forget what it was called, but there's a film supposedly about being gay in the Hasidic world, right? It's a short film. It's a craziness. These are bad bets. And all of it is based upon a substitute for the proven, tried, and true survival strategy that matters. Which has to do with Torah, and mitzvot, and community. That's what is so sad about that story. That people who believe that following Jewish law, no, that's not important to being Jewish. Being part of a Jewish community, that's not important to being Jewish. Having a sense of humor is? I mean, really? Is this something only Jews have a sense of humor? If you have a good sense of humor, that makes you distinctively Jewish? These are terrible bets. And they didn't pay off. There's a very moving piece that appeared in City Journal. And I would commend you to it. It's written by a guy I know named Harry Stein. And Harry hasn't found his way back into Yiddishkeit, into Torah yet. But he will. He will. He's on his way. His father wrote Fiddler on the Roof. And he writes about his father's last years and his father's struggles with Israel. His father had made the ultimate bet, which many Jewish people make, which is secular liberalism. That this is the idea of, when you grow up in a family and Adlai Stevenson or FDR are comparable to Moshe Rabbeinu, and there are many of us who grew up in that kind of family. I mean, my grandmother, my bubby, may she rest in peace, had a framed picture in one of those metal frames with a cracked glass on it, but it was a picture of President Roosevelt that she got when he died in April of 1945. People used to say, you know what the old saying was, that alle Jiden haben drei Welten, all Jews have three worlds. Diesen Welt, this world, jenen Welt, the world to come, und Roosevelt. And Roosevelt, okay, Roosevelt doesn't save Jewish identity. And this is one of the core problems. The idea that somehow people would bet on secular liberalism and this would make them inherently Jewish. You don't have to be Jewish to be a liberal. There are not enough Jews to even keep that point of view alive. And this is not to say that you can't be a religious Jew and be someone who supports liberal causes. Alan Dershowitz still describes himself as a liberal. I ran into him at a Hanukkah party at the White House with President Bush. I said, "What are you doing here, Alan?" He said, "Don't tell anybody." I just did. And the point about all of this is that the problem with betting on secular liberalism is it was based on a mistake. And this is the worst bet of all. Is for American Jews, for several generations, the core identifying characteristic that kept people Jewish was not the affirmation of anything. It was the denial of something. And I had this experience about 20 years ago when we had they did the 50th anniversary of Commentary magazine, and they asked for 50 representative Jewish scholars and writers to write on the subject that had launched Commentary magazine back in the 1950s, and 1950s, early 50s. And the question was, what do Jews believe? And the answer we had to write, and you got 500 words, you have to write, what are the beliefs that Jews hold in common? And the way I was thinking about it was one of those things, I was supposed to write this thing, and I couldn't bring myself to write it because it was too depressing. Because what you're supposed to say is, what do Jews have in common? And the way I formulated it is, what do I have in common in terms of my personal beliefs with Woody Allen? I don't even like a lot of his movies. I thought Magic in the Moonlight was pretty good. That's his most recent. I mean, and Woody has a very different family life than I do, thank God. He has very different politics. He never loses a chance to bash Israel, really. And it is completely unnecessary. He obviously makes fun of it. So what do Jews believe? What do Woody Allen and I share? What is the one belief we share? Anybody? Exactly! That's it! That's it! That's the Iker Zah! We don't believe that Jesus is the Son of God. Okay? I don't believe it. He doesn't believe it. You don't believe it. People at Wilshire Boulevard Temple don't believe it. People in the Democratic Jewish Coalition don't believe it. It's the one single thing that unites Jewish people, and you can see that in these numbers that I was giving you from the Pew study. We don't believe in Jesus, but trying to affirm Jewish identity by saying that, hey, look at us. What a wonderful belief we have. We don't believe in Jesus. This is like trying to sell 7-Up as the Uncola. Okay, great. It didn't work. Yeah, okay, it's the Uncola, but you have to like the taste of it. You have to say something good about it. And you know, the fact is, there are a lot of people today who don't believe in Jesus, and they're not Jewish. And that was the terrible mistake we made. That the essence of Jewish identity was the rejection of another religion, not the embrace of a faith of our own. And this is one of those things that has been so conclusively shown to be a devastating mistake for the Jewish community. And what shows you an alternative? When you talk about doom and destiny, let me say a word about something that has dramatically changed just in the 18 years that we've been away from Southern California. We moved to Seattle in 1996. Since we moved to Seattle, in Southern California, in Seattle, in the United States, in every corner of the United States, and all around the world, the explosion of Chabad Lubavitch has been nothing short of miraculous. Since the Rebbe was Nifter, since Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, his memory should be a blessing, departed from this scene, everyone assumed Chabad would collapse. How could they survive? Do you know how many Chabad houses there are in the world today? 3,600. I mean, Kathmandu. We have a friend who just was at our Shabbos table who had spent Shabbat in Kathmandu, Nepal. They have a thriving Chabad house. The heroic rabbi who was martyred in Mumbai by Islamic terrorists is Chabad. And what is the secret here? The secret is we don't deny anything. It's not that we don't believe in something. We believe in something. And we believe in Chesed. We believe in welcoming every Jew and bringing people together. And this is so completely, it is honestly, it is beyond predictability. There's no one in this room who, if I would have told you that with the Rebbe no longer alive, Chabad would just explode all over the world. Explode in the Soviet Union, pardon me, Russia. In Putin's Russia. My namesake, Dmitry Medved, right? Who's, to the very best of our knowledge, no relation. He's from the short Medvedevs. He's the Putin picked him because he's the only guy in Russia shorter than Vladimir Putin. But when Medvedev was president of Russia, he actually participated in the menorah lighting on Red Square, within sight of the mummified Lenin. You know, it's an amazing thing. By the way, that was Chabad. And this positivity brings us back to the question I asked at the beginning. What does it mean for American Jews? And what does it mean for Israel? And how can we be right as a tiny minority? And a minority overall where we are losing those Jews who the only reason they said they were Jewish was because we don't believe in a Messiah who came 2,000 years ago. We don't believe he's the Son of God. That's not enough for a Jewish identity because there are more and more people who believe that. And here's the one thing that is very profoundly important for us going forward. Is we made a bet on secular liberalism back in the 1940s and 50s, and to some extent even in the 30s, in response to Hitlerism. There was the idea that somehow America would be a better place, that Judaism would thrive if America were a less religious country. Because religion in America has always been some form of Christianity. And the idea was that the 1950s were a difficult time for Jews because there was such an emphasis on a family that prays together, stays together. They added under God into the Pledge of Allegiance. And it was Jewish people who were very, very prominent in fighting against things like the New York Regent's Prayer, which was the lead Supreme Court case that prevented prayer in schools. Do you know what the New York Regent's Prayer said? New York Regent's Prayer said this: "Dear God, we thank you for this day, for this school, for our beloved parents, and our beloved country. Amen." Okay, and Jewish people were upset by this? Right? I mean, honestly, the idea that somehow a more secular America is a safer America for Jews is not true. The biggest anti-Semites in the world today are not religious Christians. They are secularists and radical secularists. You don't hear religious Christians trying to outlaw circumcision, Brit Milah. They tried to do it in Santa Monica, for God's sake. They tried to do it in San Francisco. It was the courts that protected us. They've done it in Sweden. Do you think that in Sweden, which just recognized the Palestinian state, first European country to do it, do you think that Sweden, right, is in its hatred for Jews, they outlawed kosher slaughter a long time ago in Scandinavia? These are real problems. This is not religious Christians, it's secularists. And the idea that secularism protects Jewish people was a terrible bet. It does not. It threatens us. Because we have a double problem right now. There's a journal of religious opinion, Christian, called First Things. And they wrote about this sea change that American religious people, and I think that does include Orthodox Jews, have had to go through. Is for many, many years, people assumed that when there was a struggle between faith and doubt, the religious side was the home team. The other side was the visitors. It's no longer that way. Now, again, it's still very, very different in the world at large. In America at large, people who describe themselves as Christian, 64% attend religious services twice a month or more. The percentage in the Jewish community? Twice a month or more, 23%. So about 1/3 as likely to attend services. But see, that is our hope. It is not following the path of secularism. It is not denuding America of religious talk or religious belief. And so what chance do we have as a tiny minority religion? Where no, we don't share the theology of Christians. We don't share the theology of Buddhists. By the way, there are still more Jews in America than Buddhists, Hindus, or Muslims. Yes, more Jews in America than Muslims. It's not true in Canada. But here we come back to the question that I asked at the beginning. How can we be so sure? How can we be so sure that we are right when we are a tiny minority? And so much of the world believes that we're wrong. We're wrong about Israel. We're wrong about keeping kosher. We're wrong about bris milah. We're wrong about living our lives as Jews. How can we keep our confidence when for many people, enlightened people, the kind of people you meet on college campuses, the kind of people you meet in film studios or TV companies, broadcast companies, when people like that believe that Judaism is just embarrassing? The answer to that question was provided to me in a vort that was shared twice with me by my uncle Moish, Alova Shalom, who I mentioned before. He's my father's older brother. He was born in Ukraine. And he was a great follower of a Jewish philosopher named Ahad Ha'am, who many of you may know, Asher Tzvi Hirsch Ginsburg. He died in 1927. It's an old timer. And I always loved this Devar Torah that really was a Devar Torah from Ahad Ha'am that my uncle told me. And I wanted to use it in something I was writing, but I had no idea where to find it. This was oral transmission. And Ahad Ha'am did not write in English. He wrote primarily in Hebrew and then some in Yiddish. Okay, so I actually am very, very happy to report that this week, and it was right before the events of yesterday, I found the piece from Ahad Ha'am that I was looking for. And it was a piece called Some Consolation, and I have it here. It's translated into beautiful English. It was published in 1892. And it relates directly to the synagogue massacre and to the outstanding statement that was made about the synagogue massacre in Yerushalayim by Prime Minister Netanyahu, "We should live and be well." And this is a piece where Ahad Ha'am, Zionist philosopher, actually writes about the blood libel. And here's what he says. The blood libel, and everyone knows what the blood libel is. The blood libel is the charge that the Jewish people have a ritual obligation to slaughter a Christian child and to use the blood of that child to bake matzahs every Pesach. Yes, the blood libel originated in 1180 in England, spread around the world. The majority of people in both Saudi Arabia and Egypt believe the blood libel ad hayom hazeh. The government of Saudi Arabia endorses the blood libel. They still believe the Jews use the blood of Christian children to bake matzahs. And you can say, we don't even allow the blood of the animal, let alone the blood of a human being. There's no examples of Jewish cannibalism. We don't do this. This is absurd. So why should God allow so much of the world to believe this and the blood libel to be the source of so much persecution and genocide? Ahad Ha'am writes, and I want to conclude with this. The blood libel is the solitary case in which the general acceptance of an idea about ourselves does not make us doubt whether all the world can be wrong and we right, because it is based on an absolute lie. Every Jew who has been brought up among Jews knows as an indisputable fact that throughout the length and breadth of Jewry, there is not a single individual who drinks human blood for religious purposes. We ought, therefore, always to remember that in this instance, the general belief, which is brought to our notice ever and anon by the revival of the blood accusation, is absolutely wrong. Because this will make it easier for us to get rid of the tendency to bow to the authority of everybody in other matters. Let the world say what it will about our moral inferiority. We know that its ideas rest on popular logic and have no real scientific basis. But you ask, is it possible that everyone can be wrong and the Jews right? Yes, it is possible. The blood accusation proves it is possible. Here you see the Jews are right and perfectly innocent. A Jew and blood, could there be a more complete contradiction? And yet, the world can be entirely wrong. And if we remain committed to truth, to emet, to Torah, to an affirmative and joyous assertion of Jewish identity. To the same spirit you saw in Yerushalayim yesterday, where the synagogue had bullet holes and it had blood on the floor. Apparently one of the arms of one of the victims was severed with the tefillin still on the arm. Unimaginable. They cleaned it, they fixed it, they held Mariv there at that shul that same night. Because it is our job to answer the blood libels of our own time. One of the slogans of Hamas is, "We will win because we love death more than they love life." We have to prove them wrong. We love life even more than they love death. And loving life made this community and Israel and Jews around America and around the world go from strength to strength. Am Yisrael Chai. Thank you very much.
The relationship between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Obama. What you kind of read is not very declarative, but doesn't look very favorable. I want your opinion on what is their relationship, and how would you place President Obama in the history of presidents and the relationship with the State of Israel?
Okay. Obviously, I think people here know that it's not just a personal relationship between Bibi and Barack Obama. And it's not just his attitude toward Israel. It's his attitude toward Poland. It's his attitude toward the United Kingdom. It's his attitude toward Taiwan. It's his attitude toward all of American allies. This is somebody who has reassured our enemies and frightened our allies and undermined them. And I'll tell you what it's about. I don't believe it's about, as you know, when you're listening to the show, I don't believe he has a secret plan to ruin America or destroy the world, or he's not a secret Muslim or any of those things. What I do believe is this is a man whose entire faith in life is moral relativism. And he writes about it in his book. He writes about his own upbringing. His mother, who grew up, by the way, on Mercer Island, Washington, where we live, and moved to Hawaii right after she graduated from Mercer Island High School in 1961. His mother was somebody who had little Buddhas at home. She did a little bit of Hinduism. She did a little bit of Islam. She did a little bit of Sufism. She did Christianity. She did Gurdjieff. Everything was beautiful and everything was equal, and no people and no society was better than another. There was no such thing as darkness and light. The president needs to remember, and this is why I think he will be remembered in an even worse light than Jimmy Carter. Is Jimmy Carter, at the very least, if you read the new book about Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat and Jimmy Carter at Camp David, it's kind of inspiring in a way. Because with whatever is wrong with Egypt, and there's plenty wrong with Egypt, it has been a nace, it has been an amazing bracha that there has not been a war with Egypt since 1973. This is a very, very important thing. In any event, the point about President Obama and how he'll be remembered, and this will be unique. When Jimmy Carter seemed to undermine Israel, even after the Sinai Accords, and said unpleasant things about Israel, the Jewish vote abandoned him. Carter is the only Democrat since Roosevelt to lose the Jewish vote. He lost the Jewish vote to Ronald Reagan in 1980, and which shows that Jews are educable. I mean, they managed to vote a plurality for Reagan. Now, it was close, but still it's unimaginable today. Obama, after clearly showing he was bad for Israel because of his belief in moral relativism, and the Palestinians have their points, the Jews have their points, and a little bit here, a little bit there, no right, no wrong, no life, no death. Okay, even after that, he won 69% of the Jewish vote in 2012. It's unthinkable. We did a little bit better Jewish Republicans did in this last election, where Democratic vote was down from 69% for Obama down to 65%. But still. But it is progress. Look, my friend Rabbi Daniel Lapin has a very good line on this, is the reason that so many Jews vote just instinctively and unthinkingly for Democrats is to rebut all those silly superstitions about the superior intelligence of Jewish people.
So much listen to you every day, but listening to your speech was amazing.
Thank you.
My issue is the events that happened in Yerushalayim, and I have family over there too. This was one of the most disgusting, heartbreaking things that I've seen happen. My concern is, you see the media, you see everything, how they react. And going actually to the place of prayer, going to the synagogue, in the middle of prayer, chopping people up, chopping rabbis and innocent people. If this was reversed, and some Jews had gone to a mosque and had done such a thing, their entire wall was a riot and it was a disaster that there would be no end to it. And my frustration, this guy's reaction responding to it, and no reaction out there, general media or anything, as if nothing happened. And then the guy coming on the radio telling you, oh, thousands of Palestinian guys were killed. How can you respond to that? And how can you deal with it if you ever do? What can we do about it?
Well, one of the things you can do about it, I would like to invite and encourage everybody to come with us to Israel. And people called up and they said, are you canceling your tour to Israel? We go on a listener tour. This is going to be our 10th one. And we go for 9 days. And it's a phenomenal experience because each tour, we've had tours that range from 70 people as the smallest to over 200. And it's always a combination of Jews and Christians, and we've had Sikhs. We've even had a couple of Muslim participants who actually liked the tour, American Muslims. And one of the things we try to do is, and the reason I mention this is talking to Ambassador Durham and others who speak for the government right now. This is a very big concern. Tourism is holding its own with American Christians. Tourism is way down with American Jews. And we need to go. It matters to the people who live there. It matters to the economy. It matters to us as one people. And people have a fabulous time if they go with us. We're leaving after Pesach at the end of April, first little time of May. The weather's beautiful. And things will be quiet, and they will be safe, and they will be beautiful, and we will be able to celebrate more victories for the cause of life. And that really is the answer. The other thing is that what is fascinating about this is there has been worldwide coverage for the Palestinian celebrations. And worldwide revulsion. And that's very important. I'm proud, actually, that media covered it. Because they cover up this garbage often. But the fact that they handed out candies and they celebrated and they called this heroic, it's just, and by the way, what it shows is how confident, nothing happens in the Palestinian territories without the approval of Mahmoud Abbas and the dictatorship that he runs. He's in the middle of his 9th year of a 4-year term. Really, he was elected to a 4-year term as president of Palestine. He's in his 9th year. They haven't had elections. Thank God Obama can't do that. But in any event, I do think that this may be a turning point in some of the world's eagerness to embrace the Palestinians. I hope so.
About our responsibility when we speak about moral equivalency. Because we hear on a lot of the non-Jewish stations that they speak so beautifully. The land of Israel belongs to us, it belongs to the Jewish people because God gave it to them. And what about the fact that our message has been less than truthful? We often say, for example, I've heard many Jewish leaders say, if the Arabs would change this or change that, it's okay to give away the land of Israel. Aren't we silent by not saying the right message that God gave us the land of Israel and also our right to pray on our holiest site, Har HaBayit? Aren't we responsible for some of that moral equivalency?
The answer is basically yes, but let me say a word about the misunderstandings about the Har HaBayit, because it's very, very important. And this is an example of media malfeasance. And they're all bad on this. Fox News is bad on this. They talk about a dispute over prayer rights on a sacred site. They won't use the term Temple Mount. You notice that? They say a holy site in Jerusalem, a disputed holy site. There's no dispute! There is no dispute! But seriously, but this is, you shouldn't applaud necessarily, because Netanyahu has affirmed that the status quo will stand, the Waqf will continue to administer it. This entire stuff about us contaminating the sacred soil of Al-Aqsa by our very presence or by Jewish prayer, it isn't true. We do take often, not every year, but we do take often people up to the Har HaBayit, up to the Temple Mount. And we had the experience a couple of years ago. There's a nice Christian lady from Texas. And we warn people, you cannot bring a prayer book, you cannot pray up there, you will get in trouble. They have these obnoxious little people, minders from the Waqf, who follow any organized American tour group. And our tour group, of course, is notorious. We're going up there with Rabbi Richmond from the Temple Institute. And so they're watching us like a hawk, and this lady sort of reaches into her purse, and she takes out the hymnal, and she starts quietly reciting Protestant hymns. And this Palestinian guy with the vest of authority from the Waqf grabs the book from her and like rips it, just takes it out of her hand. He says, not allowed, not allowed, no praying, no praying. Can you believe it? I mean, and again, this was actually in terms of outraging the Christian members of our tour, that they want to ban Christian and Jewish prayer, that the only prayer that is allowed, and basically what I explain to people is try it in Saudi Arabia. It's a jail term. They don't allow churches in Saudi Arabia, let alone synagogues. They don't allow any of it. And it is very important, and you're completely correct. There's basically, I mean, if you are ceding ground in this story, in this narrative, at the beginning, and saying, well, the Palestinians have a good claim. The Palestinians have garnished. They have nothing. They have no claim. They have no national history. For people who want to talk about the long and honorable and glorious history of Palestine, try this, okay? And try this at home. First of all, and you can try, we have our CDs on why they fight, the origins of the Arab-Israeli conflict. I have a few of them back there. I don't have many, really. But I have a few of them back there, and this is 3 hours that will give you the perspective that you can present to people. But also try this question. For people who talk about the tremendous history of Palestine and people who've lived there for time immemorial, yeah, let's make a little list, if we can, in our minds. Who was the most famous of all Palestinian kings? How about the leading Palestinian general of all time? The greatest Palestinian president or viceroy or prime minister? The greatest Palestinian poet? The greatest of all Palestinian musicians? The greatest of all Palestinian architects? Can you name any famous Palestinian before Yasser Arafat, Yamach Shimon? And he wasn't even Palestinian, he was Egyptian, he was born in Cairo. And by the way, his entire claim to Palestinian ancestry is bogus, like Edward Said, who is also a Cairene and claimed to be Palestinian. These are phonies and fakers, and yes, we need to expose it. And yes, we need to be aggressive about it. And you know, one of the things here, and this is something else, I'll conclude with this, and I know it's late. It is late. But I will conclude with this. I had a fascinating conversation with a good reporter, not Christian, not Jewish, but a good reporter who had been reporting in the Middle East. I said, why is it that American reporters tend to fall for all this Palestinian stuff? And they are so harsh on Israel. He said, it's because they do, the Palestinians, let us show you some of our Arab hospitality. We'll make special tea for you. Come into our home. We will show you welcome, salam alaikum, and all this old world stuff. Israelis push and shove. I mean, Israelis are many things. They are warm and wonderful people, but on the surface, you know, there's a reason that the sabra is the national symbol. The sabra is kind of prickly on the outside, right? And frankly, they only very belatedly are getting a little bit more of this. And this is another aspect. We need, when people visit Israel, and this is one of the things we try to do on our tour, they need to be exposed to religious Israel. Because when they see people like the tzaddikim who were martyred yesterday, and they see black hat and long beard, and it's just the other, it's no good. Let people experience Shabbat. We take people down to the Kotel for Shabbat, where you can see soldiers dancing with joy. Celebrating anything in particular? Yes, celebrating the fact that Jewish people are alive, and we are home in our land, and we will continue to be there, and to be strong, in the United States, this greatest nation on God's green earth. I look forward to talking to you back there.